Coming up on Arirang News, the economic damage from the pandemic becomes clearer. Data show U.S. GDP contracted in the second quarter by almost 33%, the worst decline in its history, and a similar story in Germany. South Korea's industrial production recovered in June, growing by more than 4%. It's a sign the local economy may have already hit bottom. And South Korea's first dedicated military communications satellite is now securely in orbit. It's going to provide more secure comms for South Korean forces in the field. It's 5 p.m. here in Seoul. Thank you for tuning in to Arirang News. I'm Devin Whiting. South Korea's first dedicated satellite for military communications, Anasis II, has reached its final position in geostationary orbit 10 days after blasting off from Florida. The Defense Acquisition Program Administration said the satellite reached an orbit at some 36,000 kilometers above the Earth on Friday at 11 minutes past 7 a.m. Korea time. Once the manufacturer and the military complete a series of tests by the end of the year, the satellite will contribute to a modern, cutting-edge defense with its increased transmission capacity and anti-jamming functions. It's also expected to boost long-distance wireless communications, particularly for troops deployed overseas. Another welcome opportunity to get out of the house this weekend for people in Korea. From Saturday, Seoul Grand Park is reopening its botanical garden and indoor zoo. They've been closed for months because of the pandemic. It'll only be open, though, from 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. Visitors have to wear face masks, have their temperatures checked, and sanitize their hands. They also have to register their information in a visitor log. The coronavirus pandemic has caused GDP in the United States to fall by the most in history, and the same in Germany. Second quarter GDP in the American economy was down almost 33%. Ji-young reports.
The COVID-19 pandemic has taken an unprecedented toll on the global economy, with the U.S. and Germany recording their steepest ever drops in gross domestic product. According to statistics released by the U.S. Commerce Department on Thursday, the country's economy shrank at a 32.9% annual rate during the second quarter.
Consumer spending accounts for 70% of economic activity in the U.S., so the steep contraction last quarter was driven by the lockdown.
This is the largest quarterly decline since such figures were first recorded in 1947. The plunge was far greater than the 8.4% fall in the fourth quarter of 2008 at the peak of the global financial crisis. The expert said he expects the U.S. economy to see an upswing in the second half of the year as the economy hit its lowest point in the second quarter.
I believe vaccines will be developed and will be distributed in the fourth quarter. If that happens, I expect the U.S. economy to recover at a fast pace and reach the level it was at before the pandemic.
Such news comes as Germany, Europe's biggest economy, also recorded a huge drop in GDP. During the April to June period, Germany's economy shrank by 10.1% on quarter as exports and business investment collapsed. The plunge far exceeded the fall of 4.7% in the first quarter of 2009 during the global financial crisis. Experts around the world are looking for signs of improvement during the third quarter as they say high unemployment and limited consumption could slow the pace of economic recovery. Ji-young, Arirang News.
And after months of sluggish production figures due to the pandemic, South Korea's overall industrial output rebounded in June. But despite the positive figures, the government says it's too early to relax. Kim Sang-min has more.
South Korea's overall industrial output has increased for the first time in 6 months, with the manufacturing, retail sales, and investment sectors all seeing a jump from the previous month. According to Statistics Korea, the country's overall industrial output soared 4.2% on month in June. This was largely driven by the production in the mining and manufacturing industries, which saw a 7.2% increase on month. This figure was its biggest jump since 2009 and was helped by the automobile and semiconductor sectors. Manufacturing exports also saw the biggest on-month increase in 33 years, 9.8% up from May's figures.
We saw a huge drop in exports in April and May as the outbreak spread across the world. But as the US, EU, and other major countries started reopening their economies, exports increased a lot in June.
South Korea's retail sales also saw a bump of 2.4%, thanks in part to government policies like relief funds and tax cuts for automobile purchases.
As for the retail sales, they decreased much in February and March and rebounded in April, May, and June. Unlike retail and service production, this sector saw a huge jump, up to around the level it was before COVID-19.
Facility investment also edged up 5.4%. However, the Director General of Statistics Korea did say that such figure does not have a strong link with the impact of COVID-19. For the first time in 5 months, the indices for both current and future business conditions went up. The index for current conditions saw a 0.2 percentage point increase, and the index for future business conditions edged up 0.4 percentage points. While the country seems to have finally escaped the impact of COVID-19, the officials said the uncertainty posed by the pandemic is still huge, along with potential risks coming from US-China trade war. Kim Sung-min, Arirang News.
South Korea's leading chemical company, LG Chem, has seen record high profits amid the pandemic. The company says its operating profit in the second quarter came to about $480 million, more than double the same period last year. That's thanks in large part to its plant in Poland, which makes batteries for electric vehicles, achieving stability and cutting costs. Sales were up 25% from the quarter before as the company shipped more electric vehicles to Europe and China, where environmental regulations are stricter. LG Chem says it expects a good performance in the next quarter as well, with the launch of new EV models in Europe. The coronavirus pandemic is causing an economic upheaval, but Apple, Amazon, Facebook, and Google are doing better than many expected. Apple says its quarterly profits hit $11.25 billion, up from $10 billion a year earlier. The shift to remote work boosted demand for devices like Macs and iPads. Amazon saw its biggest profit in history at $5.2 billion. Facebook saw an 11% rise in revenue and a profit of $5.2 billion. That was smaller than other quarters, but higher than what had been forecast. Alphabet, the parent company of Google and YouTube, saw a drop in profits of about 30% to around $7 billion as companies spent less on ads. Still, that too was better than expected. Time now for an in-depth look at the market news this afternoon, and for that I'm joined on the line by Mr. Daniel Yu, global strategist at Yuanta Securities. Mr. Yu, thank you for making time on this Friday.
Thank you for having me today.
In New York, the Dow and the S&P down on Thursday seems partly on the U.S. economy shrinking by a historic amount. The Nasdaq was higher, though, on these big earnings from the tech companies. What's the story in the global markets today?
Yes, as you said, U.S. market was quite confusing, where Dow Jones was down about 0.85%, S&P was down 0.38%, while the Nasdaq was up 0.43%. The actual losses at the beginning of the day was quite significant. All three indices were falling more than 1%, but it seems it has recovered because of these earnings that are coming out from the large IT companies of U.S. The overall market started weak because of the weak GDP numbers. They showed the biggest decline of 9.5% year-on-year decline, which we haven't seen in 1940s afterwards. So this was the biggest decline that we've seen, and that's why we started with U.S. market starting quite weak. However, though, the Apple numbers, the Facebook numbers, all these major tech companies of U.S. showed significant growth in earnings despite the COVID-19 impact, and therefore market kind of recovered, and clearly the Nasdaq is leading the overall market. It seems that the futures market is the same case, where the Nasdaq numbers are looking good, while the overall market is going up, but overall the Nasdaq seems to continue to be the attractive index of U.S. Following this U.S. movement, we are seeing the European market showing quite a bit of a rise today. After yesterday's weakness, all in all, the economic growth rate should be improving due to the significant fiscal and monetary policy we're seeing that's coming from the both sides of Europe as well as U.S.
Well, in Korea today, again, a mixed situation between the two main indices, a lot of uncertainty regarding the pandemic. What's happening in Korean stocks?
After quite a bit of a rise that we've seen in Kospi, actually breaking the highest number since the beginning of this year, today we saw quite a bit of a significant decline of the market. Kospi is down 0.78%. The Kospi 50 is down 0.8%. The Kosdaq is up slightly by 0.14%. Clearly, the uncertainty is happening because of the Korean won appreciating quite rapidly. We actually saw Korean won going down to below 1190 territories. That might be affecting the export numbers to be quite weak because of such strong won. So everybody seems to be looking at what's happening to the currency trend. Hopefully, we'll see some stabilization in terms of the currency. All in all, if the Korea shows a significant recovery in the third quarter of the economic numbers, then equity market would be probably in a good situation, even though the won is appreciating at this point in time.
Now, in the larger economy, we have data showing that Korea's industrial production, consumption, and investment were all up in June for the first time in 6 months. Tell us about that and whether you think that's a sign we're back on track for a recovery.
Yes, as you said, the retail sales and the industrial productions, construction output all seems to be showing quite good number. We saw retail sales rising by 6.3% year on year in June. Industrial production is also showing quite reasonable number, even though it contracted by 0.5% year on year. But clearly it was a revised up number versus the expectation of 10% decline. Also, the construction output in South Korea decreased by 2.7% year on year in June, following a downward revised the 5.4% contraction in the previous month. All in all, these numbers seem to be showing that Korea is clearly recovering. If you look at the economic leading indicators, it seems to have bottomed and is showing a rising trend. If this trend continues, then Korea will be showing economic growth rate recovering going into the third quarter and fourth quarter. And particularly for next year, we could recover to well above 2% growth rate year on year. If that's the case, Korean equity market would be showing upward trend. Of course, however, though, given the fact that the market has risen quite significantly and it has broken this year's high, I think that the tendency is that they want to take some measure to take some breathers. So therefore, there might be some short-term correction, but we should be using that as an opportunity to buy on weakness.
Got it. All right, Mr. Yu, always appreciate getting your insights. Have a great weekend. Thank you.
Thank you very much. You too.
Now, from today, new laws are in effect in South Korea to protect tenants from fast rising prices for housing. Under bills passed yesterday by the National Assembly, tenants nearing the end of their leases have the right to renew their contracts for another 2 years. This applies both to monthly rent and to the jeonse system, in which the tenant pays a large one-time deposit in lieu of monthly rent. Once that second term is up, landlords can only raise the size of the rent or jeonse deposit by up to 5%. In a cabinet meeting Friday, Prime Minister Jung Se-kyun said swift implementation of the law is needed to prevent confusion in the market and to stabilize people's livelihoods.
Around 38% of people in South Korea rent. I expect these laws will stabilize their livelihoods. I ask related ministries and local governments to notify people of the changes and step up follow-up measures.
The revision to the law comes amid mounting anger over property prices, which continue to soar despite the government's measures to try and stabilize them. A third bill, likely to be voted on next week, would require landlords to report to the government the actual amount of the rent and/or jeonse deposits they receive. With South Korea's central bank keeping its policy rate at a record low, the average rate paid on new deposits at local retail banks has fallen below 1% for the first time. According to the Bank of Korea, interest rates for depositors fell in June from 1.07% the month before to just 0.89%. Interest on new bank loans also fell on month to an average of 2.72%. The BOK has cut its policy rate twice this year amid the pandemic, standing now at just 0.5%. And that brings us to the end of this newscast. Thank you for watching. More live news coming your way at 7 p.m. Korea time.